One question I get over and over from photographers is, what subjects sell best? Often it's serious amateur photographers thinking about getting into stock photography for the first time and wanting to know what subjects they can go out to shoot to get the quickest results. But it can just as easily be long-time professionals looking for a similar, easy, quick-fix solution. Either way, it shows a fundamental lack of understanding of stock photography buyers, and even why these people buy photography at all. In dealing with it comes down to understanding the difference between photo subject and photo content. Your subject is basically whatever you happen to point the camera at when you capture a photo, while your content is the way you combine all the physical elements, intangible elements, and your photographic skills and techniques to create an image that conveys a specific usable message. So 100 random photographers could point their cameras at the same subject, and chances are you'd end up with 100 photos with very different content. Of those 100 photos, my guess is you'd be lucky if 10% of those had real sales potential. You see, they might all be great photos, but in a commercial context, content rules. There are definitely some subjects that are more commercial than others, and we'll look at some of those shortly, but the fact is, once you learn how to capture commercial content, virtually any subject you can imagine will have real sales potential. So what makes a commercial image? First up, I should be clear, when we talk about photo buyers, we are talking about commercial photo buyers, publishers, not private buyers looking for prints to decorate their home. That's a whole different market. So these commercial buyers select images that perform a very specific task for them. Broadly speaking, they either need an image to illustrate an object or idea, or they need an image that conveys a more complex message. So it's all illustrations or messages. Illustrations are the easier images to capture, so there's no shortage of them. And the truth is, with today's technology, even a very inexperienced photographer is going to be able to capture marketable illustrations if they shoot enough frames. The microstock libraries are full of these images, so competition is sky high and prices are rock bottom as well. So there's really very little value going after that part of the market. Leave that to the amateurs and the semi-pros who don't know any better. The message images, however, are a whole different story. These are the images you see with a clear sense of purpose that goes beyond simply capturing a moment in time and space. This is where the serious photographer moves beyond that beginner stage and stops simply recording what they see, and instead they start using their skills and creativity to create an image that tells the viewer something more about that moment in time and space. So instead of simply documenting the situation, they're commenting on it. In some ways it's a kind of storytelling. Some photographers never really get there, and some have no desire to even try, and that's fine if that's your preference. But if you want to sell stock images to the higher end buyers, then you need to start creating images that tell a story that the buyer can use. And that will usually mean creating images that convey a message that adds meaning to the buyer's own message. And the best thing you can start doing immediately to make that happen is get to know your buyers. The single most valuable exercise you could ever do here is to stop this video right now and make a list of your main subjects. Some people have 2 or 3, others might have a dozen or more, but then under each of those, list every possible buyer type you can come up with. Who uses this subject matter and what do they use it for? Some of them will be using them as illustrations, and that's fine. You'll always have these in your collection, so a sale's a sale. You should always look for the buyer types who need a little more from the image. The editorial buyers, the corporate buyers, advertising buyers, gift card and calendar publishers, clothing items. Don't forget about the digital publishers, websites, government departments. If you're stuck for ideas, go through the price calculator website and just have a look at some of the categories there, and you'll realise there's a huge number of buyer types out there, and each of them are going to have slightly different, very specific needs. Then once you've got your list, for each of these buyer types, go looking for an example or two of published images. Books, magazines and websites will probably do here, but give some thought to the specific purpose behind the use of the image. Try and get in the buyer's head and work out what it was that they needed the image to convey, and from that you'll soon get a feel for the content they were actually searching for when they found this image. When you start to see that content angle in published images, you'll also find you see it just as clearly in your own photo ops, and more often or not these will become your best selling photos. In fact, at Global Eye we usually tell our photographers right from the start that the buyers might be searching for subjects, but they always buy the message. So if you want regular sales, you need to get familiar with the kind of content that your potential buyers are using, and make sure you're capturing that content and conveying it in your images. You honestly can't spend too much time on this. The more familiar you are with your potential clients and their specific needs, the more likely it is that you'll spot the content they want in your photo ops and capture it in a format they can use. Once you spot a good commercial photo op, you can always ramp it up by manipulating the subject matter and working in additional elements to strengthen your message. These can be physical objects like props or symbols, or intangibles like ideas, concepts or emotions. Either way, you should look for ways to incorporate these into your compositions to add layers of complementary meaning to the image. The single best option here though is to include people. Specifics will vary depending on the photo op and the message you're trying to convey, but generally for a modern stock image you want people involved in the situation, not just posing for the camera. And if people are in the foreground, which they usually should be, then they should be the main subject, the point of interest, and what they're doing or experiencing will be the story that you're trying to convey. The rest of the situation or the surrounding elements will usually become quite secondary to that experience. If their faces are visible, then their eyes should be clearly shown as well, so as to convey some sort of emotion or mood. Expressions and emotions always need to be clearly visible without being overcooked. If there's more than one person, generally you want to convey some sort of connection between them. It can be physical or emotional, even just a bit of eye contact, but it needs to be there. There's little demand for shots of the back of people's heads, and they really are a dime a dozen. So you'll always do better to take control and set the image up the way you want it to capture faces, eyes, connections, emotions, and the whole experience. If the people aren't in the foreground, then move them right off to the background, or leave them out altogether. The web is flooded with these sorts of shots of people lost somewhere in the middle ground, and they just never sell. They're just confusing and distracting for the viewer, so either make the people the main foreground subject, or move them way off to the background where they can still add some sort of meaning or interest factor without distracting the viewer. You should always look for ways to add depth and meaning. With people images, this is mostly done with facial expressions and body language, but it can also use props and symbols in any image to increase the value of the image to the buyer. There's definitely an art to it though. The tricky part is you add meaning by making certain elements more obvious to the viewer, but you add depth by making them a little more subtle, so the viewer has to dig a little deeper to really get it. The solution is often to convey two distinct emotions or messages in the same image. The first is clearly recognisable and hard to miss, and the second reveals itself a little more slowly once the viewer invests a little more time in the image. For that to happen, you need to have the elements that create good visual interest and hold the viewer's attention long enough for the reveal. The initial meaning or message is conveyed with slightly exaggerated expressions, body language and props, while the secondary message is revealed more slowly with more subtle expressions and connections and symbols. Developing multiple storylines is an easy way to grow your stock of commercial images even faster. Whenever you find yourself a commercial photo op, just swap out different elements and props to create different storylines and convey different concepts, moods or ideas. Best example I know of this is one photographer who carries a suitcase that's full of, well, basically junk, and everywhere he goes. He's got books, magazines, wine glasses, coffee mugs, sunglasses, reading glasses, broken laptop computer, mobile phones, telephones, binoculars, you name it, it's in there. And every time he sets up a shot, he looks for a few different props he can bring in to change the entire storyline in an instant. This is particularly useful when working with amateur models, and he tells me that the props help the model understand what he's trying to capture, and the expressions and poses follow more naturally. Again, you don't want to be thinking too hard on the subject matter, but more on what a specific prop might convey in this particular photo op that a buyer can use. As an example, a person sitting on a beach reading a romance novel conveys a very different storyline than if they were reading a language book or a travel guide or the business section of a newspaper or a scuba diving magazine, or if they're talking on a phone or working on their laptop or just holding a glass of wine and enjoying the view. Even without people in the frame, you should still be aiming to shoot multiple angles on every photo op. You can obviously do this with your compositions, with what you leave in, what you take out, but also by altering your focus and emphasis. Lighting can be a useful tool here, and a good way to increase your output instantly is to look for ways to vary the lighting to create different moods and messages in the exact same setup. You could no doubt do a bit of this in Photoshop, but if you aim to do it at capture, you're more likely to spot those little composition tweaks that will take the image from good to great. Again, the real secret here is to avoid getting too focused on the subject in front of you, and always stay focused on the needs for your possible end users and what each of those people are going to need from this subject matter. When you do this consistently, you'll not only shoot more commercial images, you'll be getting a lot more of them. One example I like to use here is flowers. At some stage, most photographers will shoot some flower images. These turn up everywhere, in all the photography magazines and all the photo sharing sites, and close at home I know I see a lot of them in the membership applications that come through Global Eye, and at least half of those we look at have at least one flower macro in there. So it's no surprise that when the average photographer is faced with a flower, they'll almost automatically reach for the macro lens, because that's the photographer shot they're conditioned to think of. The funny thing is, I don't recall ever seeing a macro flower shot published. except in the photography magazines. When I think of published flower photos though, I think of the soft focus single bloom shot for gift cards, the massive blooms they use on seed packets and plant labels, the specimen shot used in textbooks, the full garden shots and the detail shots that turn up in all the garden magazines and books and so on. Getting all these shots is quite easy once you stop thinking like a photographer and start thinking about it from your end user's perspective. Because in the latter situation you're trying to cover all possible angles, while the photographer mentality tends to go looking for that one perfect shot. So instead of approaching each photo opportunity with your photographer's mindset, what photo do I want here, really train yourself to look at it from a photo buyer's perspective and think, what are my clients going to need from this subject matter? Before you even look through the viewfinder, make sure you stop and think about what buyer types might be interested in the subject matter and what each of those buyer types will need in terms of content and message. As a result, you'll usually come up with multiple buyer types and some very specific information and ideas on the type of image they're going to need. Then you can really go to work and use your skills to create images with the kind of content that sells over and over and over. Make sure you try it next time you're out. Even better, get in the habit of pre-planning your shoots. Before you head out, treat it like a mini assignment and go through all this in advance. Think about all your possible markets for the subject matter you're going to shoot, and then the style and content that each of those buyer types will need, and then make yourself a short shot list for each. Suddenly you'll find instead of heading out hoping to capture a handful of great photography images, you'll be coming home with dozens of commercial images, and you'll probably find your photography images are considerably better as well. Okay, so remember, it's not the subject that makes the sale but the content, and it's not what you shoot that determines your sales potential, but how you shoot it. And once you get clear on that, once you really get it, you'll get a whole new perspective on things, and virtually anything you look at will have real sales potential. And there are two very big advantages in this approach. First of all, you're going to find you have many more creative possibilities in every single photo op. While you may be looking at creating an image of a single subject, you'll learn to spot dozens of content angles that you can apply to that subject. And secondly, you'll find you face far less competition for these less obvious subjects. Stock libraries are overflowing with all the popular themes, the lifestyle shots, technology, finance, industry, agriculture, health, retirement, and so on. But if you can find your own specialty buyers who desperately need a story told using the subjects you like to shoot, that's always going to translate into lower competition and much better prices. In photography, just like any other business, the winners will always be those who study their market, identify their ideal customer, and then find innovative new ways to meet that customer's needs and surpass their expectations. So I'm hoping you've made a few notes and we've got a few ideas on how you might apply all this to your own situation and your interests. This is powerful stuff, and I do hope you'll put it to use. I do have to tell you, a lot of people who have found this useful and put it to work have jumped at what I'm going to share with you next. You see, the button below will take you to a stock library that's a little bit different to anything you might have seen so far. I will warn you though, if you just want to shoot and sell simple basic photo illustrations, then this isn't going to be for you. If that's your interest, then that's fine, but this isn't going to be the best option. This library seeks out the high quality buyers who need the more complex images we've just been talking about, buyers who will still pay good dollars for the right image. This library takes an old-fashioned cooperative approach of independent photographers working together to increase our exposure, reduce our costs, and sell more photos. It won't be for everyone, and not everyone will get in, but it really is worth a look, if only just to see that you do have real options for shooting and selling high-quality images for a much more selective market. If that sounds like a better option, please click the button below and check it out for yourself.